Happiness, a word we hear all the time and that in many cases has become a life goal. We spend our days trying to achieve it, hoping that it will come as a reward, a prize for everything we have done. The idea that we are happy when we have a problem-free life surrounded by pleasure and success is widely spread throughout society. But what if I told you that this concept of happiness is an illusion? That in reality the unbridled search for it may be taking us away from true peace? Marcus Aurelius, the great Roman emperor and Stoic philosopher, warns us about the trap of this constant search for happiness. He teaches us that instead of seeking happiness as something to be achieved, we should focus on living with wisdom, virtue, and self-control. Happiness, as we understand it, is a fleeting and superficial concept, which depends on external and often uncontrollable factors. True peace does not lie in achieving happiness, but in accepting life as it is, with all its ups and downs, and in learning to live according to our values. In Stoic philosophy, happiness is not an end in itself, but a byproduct of a well-lived life, focused on virtues such as courage, wisdom, justice, and temperance. By understanding this, we can stop getting lost in the endless pursuit of a state of constant joy, and instead learn to live in a more balanced and serene way, without getting caught up in what we cannot control. The idea that happiness should be a life goal is deeply rooted in our culture, but in the Stoic view, this direct pursuit of happiness is not only wrong, but also harmful. Marcus Aurelius teaches us that true happiness is not something that is directly sought, but rather a byproduct of a well-lived life, grounded in virtues and wise actions. When we seek happiness as a goal, we end up fixating on the idea that it is outside of us in external situations or in specific moments. However, this view can lead us to an endless cycle of frustration, as there will always be something more to be achieved, something more to do, something more to conquer. Happiness thus becomes an endless quest, full of frustrated expectations and disappointments. However, when we shift our focus to virtue and building a solid character, happiness becomes a natural consequence of this journey. Marcus Aurelius does not urge us to live in order to be happy, but to live justly, with wisdom, courage, and self-control. Happiness then emerges as a side effect of a life well lived. We do not need to pursue happiness. It comes with time, as we cultivate these virtues and seek to live in accordance with what is morally correct. In our daily lives, this means that we should focus on being the best version of ourselves, without expecting happiness to be the direct reward for our efforts. This does not mean that we should not seek moments of pleasure or satisfaction, but rather that these moments should not be the basis of our happiness. Instead, we should seek inner peace through self-understanding, self-care, and reflection. Happiness then becomes something less fragile and much more stable, as it depends on our ability to live with integrity and balance. This kind of approach, which puts virtue first, allows us to live with greater mental and emotional clarity over time, without getting lost in unrealistic expectations or frustrations. By focusing on cultivating what is truly important, our happiness becomes something more resilient, something that does not depend on external factors or temporary circumstances. The idea that life should be perfect and flawless is deeply ingrained in social expectations. We are constantly bombarded with the idea that we should be successful, happy all the time, and free from hardship. However, this distorted view of an ideal life creates constant pressure, which often leads to frustration, stress, and dissatisfaction. Marcus Aurelius, in his Stoic wisdom, teaches us that accepting the imperfections of life and ourselves is, in fact, the path to true serenity. Perfection, in its purest form, is something that is beyond our reach. Life is imperfect by nature, full of contradictions and challenges, and accepting this is not a sign of weakness, but of wisdom. Rather than fighting against imperfections or trying to control them, Stoic philosophy teaches us to embrace them and learn from them. By accepting our flaws and limitations as well as the difficulties of life, we free ourselves from the burden of the constant expectation that everything must be perfect. This allows us to live more peacefully, without the constant fear of failing or being less than expected. Marcus Aurelius, in his Pensées, often talks about how difficulties are opportunities for growth. Instead of seeing mistakes and failures as insurmountable obstacles, he saw them as learning opportunities, moments in which we can shape our character and strengthen our minds. This approach is an invitation to transform difficulties into steps towards maturity and wisdom, rather than treating them as something to be feared or avoided. In everyday life, accepting imperfection begins with practicing self-compassion. This involves being kind to yourself when you fail, recognizing that we are all human and prone to error. It also means learning to deal with the frustration of not meeting all expectations, whether our own or those of others. Instead of falling into self-criticism and despair, acceptance allows us to take a step back, reflect on what we can learn from the situation, and move forward with more balance. In addition, accepting the world as it is, with its imperfections and uncertainties, helps us live more fully and peacefully. We may not control external circumstances, but we can choose how we react to them. By stopping fighting what we cannot change, our minds become clearer, and we are able to live more lightly, embracing life in its entirety, with all its ups and downs. We live in a society where immediate pleasure and constant success are often seen as the greatest indicators of happiness. The media, social networks, and even our own aspirations teach us that we should always be searching for the next achievement, the next gratification, the next validation. However, Marcus Aurelius, on the contrary, warns us about the dangers of this incessant search and invites us to reflect on what is truly important in life. The constant search for pleasure, whether through material goods, ephemeral experiences, or the incessant search for recognition, can lead us into a vicious cycle of dissatisfaction. There is always something more to desire, a new achievement to be achieved, a new pleasure to be experienced. The problem is that by seeking pleasure and success as our ultimate goals, we end up placing our happiness in the hands of external and unpredictable factors, making it fragile and unstable. If the pleasure we seek depends on something we have no control over, such as the approval of others, social recognition, or the acquisition of material goods, we are handing over our well-being to something fickle. Marcus Aurelius teaches us that instead of focusing on accumulating wealth or achieving success as we define it in external terms, we should focus on living a life of virtue. For him, what really matters is not the status or the goods we acquire, but the quality of our actions, our integrity, and the positive impact we make on the world. Instead of seeking constant pleasure, we should seek inner peace, which comes from accepting what we have and the ability to live according to our principles, without depending on the external world for our happiness. Applying this teaching to everyday life, we can ask ourselves, what really brings us lasting satisfaction? The satisfaction that comes from momentary achievements, or the peace that comes from gratitude and contentment with what we have? Often, when we place our happiness in the pursuit of pleasures or ephemeral successes, we forget to value the simple things in life: a moment of reflection, a sincere conversation, or the pleasure of living authentically. True happiness, according to the Stoics, does not come from external experiences, but from living in harmony with our values and our human nature. This relentless pursuit of pleasure and success can actually distance us from what really matters. Reflecting on our lives, focusing on our deepest values, and finding satisfaction in the little things are the keys to achieving lasting peace. By understanding this, we can let go of the idea that happiness lies in the next achievement and begin to realize that it is already present in the simple act of living with purpose and balance. The idea of happiness as a continuous state is an expectation that can lead us to frustration. We live in a society where we are constantly encouraged to seek happiness that is constant, pleasure that never ends, a perfect experience. However, happiness, as understood by the Stoics, is not a constant state or something to be maintained forever. It is, in fact, a series of moments of serenity, reflection, and contentment, which arise when we live in a way that is aligned with our values and with what is essential to us. Marcus Aurelius, in his thoughts, often talks about the importance of living in the present, without being anxious about the future or stuck in the past. Happiness, then, is not about achieving a fixed state, but about finding moments of peace in everyday life, even in difficult times. These moments may be small, but they are profound. A moment of introspection, a genuine conversation, the feeling of being in harmony with what we are doing. This change in perspective is liberating. By accepting that happiness does not have to be constant, we are able to appreciate life in its ups and downs, without the need for permanent satisfaction. Moments of happiness arise when we are connected to what is important to us, without worrying about whether we are always happy. Accepting that life is made up of cycles and that happiness is something that appears naturally when we are aligned with our purpose allows us to live more peacefully and with less anxiety. In our daily lives, this means that we do not need to wait for major events or achievements to feel happy. Sometimes true joy can be found in the simple things: a moment of peace after a busy day, a deep reflection at the end of a walk, or a simple act of kindness. By focusing on these small moments, we can cultivate a more lasting happiness that is not dependent on external factors or an unrealistic expectation that we should always be at the peak of our satisfaction. Happiness, therefore, is not a state to be maintained, but a series of moments of clarity, gratitude, and acceptance. When we stop expecting happiness to be a fixed state, it becomes a natural part of our journey, flowing more spontaneously and naturally into our lives. Challenges and obstacles are inevitable in everyone's life. If we lived in a world where everything was easy and without difficulties, we would never be challenged to grow, reflect, or become better. However, the way we choose to face these challenges can make all the difference in our inner peace and emotional well-being. Marcus Aurelius, in his writings, often reminds us that difficulties are not enemies, but opportunities in disguise. Moments that offer us the chance to exercise virtue and develop a deeper inner strength. Rather than seeing obstacles as something to be avoided or fought with anger and frustration, Stoic philosophy invites us to see them as instruments of growth. Every difficult situation we face is, in some way, an opportunity to exercise our inner qualities, such as patience, courage, resilience, and wisdom. Approaching challenges with this perspective helps us to relieve the pressure we feel in the face of difficulties and to find a sense of purpose, even in adversity. Changing our perspective, however, does not mean that challenges cease to be difficult or that we should ignore our emotions in the face of painful situations. Rather, it is about recognizing that despite the momentary discomfort or frustration, each obstacle brings with it a valuable lesson. Approaching a problem calmly and rationally, rather than reacting impulsively, allows us to find more effective solutions and helps us develop a stronger, more balanced mindset. For example, if we face a problem at work, we can choose to react with anger and frustration, or approach the situation with curiosity and openness to learning. By changing our attitude, we move from a victim stance to an active agent of change. This shift in perspective is one of the keys to Stoicism. Instead of fighting against what we cannot control, we can control how we react to it. This gives us an inner power that is, in fact, the source of our true peace. Furthermore, when we reflect on the difficulties we have overcome in the past, we realize that many of them taught us more about ourselves than any easy time could have. This creates a positive cycle of growth, where each difficulty we face becomes an opportunity to evolve. Each challenge becomes a chance to learn more about life, the world, and ourselves. This approach, centered on acceptance and reflection, allows us to deal with adversity in a calmer way. Instead of reacting emotionally in an impulsive way, we can choose how we want to face situations, finding peace not in the circumstances, but in our way of responding to them. The idea of detachment is fundamental in Stoic philosophy and is often misunderstood. Detachment does not mean becoming indifferent to life or others, but rather freeing ourselves from excessive dependence. on external things such as social status, validation from others, or material goods, in order to find a deeper and more lasting inner peace. Marcus Aurelius teaches us that by becoming excessively attached to external things, we place our happiness in the hands of factors over which we have no control. When we understand that nothing external can give us true happiness, we begin to build an emotional freedom that allows us to live with more serenity and balance. Our attachment to material things and social recognition can become an emotional prison. When we constantly seek the approval of others, or believe that happiness lies in acquiring more possessions or achievements, we give our power away to something that is fickle and uncontrollable. This creates a constant feeling of anxiety and dissatisfaction, as there is always a need for more recognition, more money, more success. This endless search prevents us from living in the present moment and appreciating what we already have. Marcus Aurelius, however, challenges us to free ourselves from this dependence. He teaches us that true freedom comes from detachment, from the ability to live without being dominated by external circumstances. This means that we must learn to appreciate things without becoming dependent on them for our happiness. We can enjoy material achievements and pleasures, but without letting them define us. By practicing detachment, we learn to separate our inner peace from the fluctuations of life, remaining stable even in the midst of difficulties. In our daily lives, detachment manifests itself when we free ourselves from the constant need for approval or validation from others. This does not mean being indifferent or uninterested, but rather understanding that our self-esteem should not depend on external factors. When we let go of the need to please others or be the best at everything, we begin to live more authentically, based on our own values rather than on the opinions of others. This type of emotional freedom allows us to act with more integrity and be more true to ourselves. In addition, detachment helps us to deal with loss in a more balanced way. We all face losses in life, whether it be loved ones, jobs, or material possessions. If we are too attached to these things, the loss can be devastating, as we feel like a part of us has been taken away. However, by practicing detachment, we learn that true peace does not depend on external things, and no matter how painful the loss, our inner peace remains intact. This does not mean that we should not feel sadness or pain, but rather that we should not let the loss define us or destroy our serenity. Detachment, therefore, gives us the emotional freedom to live a fuller life without being constantly dragged down by the search for validation or the need to have more. By freeing ourselves from dependence on external things, we discover that true happiness lies within us, in our ability to live with authenticity, balance, and inner peace. Throughout our philosophical journey, we have learned that happiness, as it is generally understood, is an illusory pursuit. The idea that we should be constantly happy, living without hardships, and always seeking more pleasure and success, distances us from true inner peace. Instead of seeking happiness as a goal in itself, we should, as Marcus Aurelius teaches us, focus on living a life based on virtue, self-control, and acceptance of the imperfections of the world and ourselves. True happiness is not a continuous state or something to be achieved through external achievements, but rather a byproduct of a life well lived, focused on values such as wisdom, courage, and temperance. By changing our perspective on challenges, we see that difficulties are not obstacles to avoid, but opportunities for growth and learning. And by practicing detachment, we free our minds from external fluctuations, allowing us to live with more serenity, authenticity, and balance. Stoic philosophy invites us to a way of living that does not depend on external circumstances for our inner peace. Rather than seeking a fleeting happiness that comes and goes, we can cultivate a deep tranquility that comes from accepting what we cannot control, focusing on the virtues, and practicing detachment. True happiness, then, is something that emerges naturally as we move away from the relentless pursuit of pleasure and focus on living with wisdom, balance, and purpose. Ultimately, happiness is not a lie, but rather a misinterpretation of what it really means. It lies not in seeking the absence of problems or achieving external success, but rather in finding peace and serenity, even in adversity. By following the Stoic teachings, we can thus discover a more lasting and true happiness that does not depend on external factors, but on our ability to live authentically and in alignment with what truly matters.